The school bell rang, marking the end of the day, but Emily Hayes wasn't in a hurry to leave. She stayed back in the classroom, finishing her notes while other students rushed toward the exits. At 17, she was used to moving at her own pace. Outside, the Arizona sun cast long shadows over Verde Valley High, making the campus look eerily empty. As she finally walked toward the parking lot, she sensed something unusual. A black SUV was parked at the far end, its tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Emily had seen that vehicle before earlier in the morning, near the main gate. Her instincts, honed from years of listening to her father's lessons about awareness, told her something was off. She reached her Jeep and opened the door when she heard footsteps approaching. Turning slowly, she found two men standing nearby. One of them was dressed in a crisp suit, the other in a dark jacket. Both looked out of place in a high school parking lot. The man in the suit smiled. "Emily Hayes, right?" His voice was smooth, almost polite, but there was something unsettling about the way he said her name. Emily's grip tightened on her car keys. "Who's asking?" she replied, keeping her voice calm. The man chuckled. "No need to be nervous. We're just here to deliver a message." He took a step closer, his eyes scanning her face. "Tell your father we need to talk. And it would be unfortunate if he keeps ignoring our generous offers." Emily felt her pulse quicken, but she refused to show fear. "I don't know what you're talking about." The second man smirked. "Oh, we think you do." He gestured toward the SUV. "You've got a smart dad, but even smart men can make mistakes. And mistakes have consequences." Emily knew exactly what they were doing, intimidation, pure and simple. But she had grown up with a father who had spent his life in the military. He had taught her never to show weakness. Without another word, she climbed into her Jeep and locked the doors. The men didn't try to stop her. Instead, the one in the suit simply smiled again. "Drive safe, Emily. And tell your dad to pick up his phone next time." As she pulled out of the parking lot, she stole a glance at her rearview mirror. The SUV didn't follow her, but the message had been received loud and clear. This wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. Emily gripped the steering wheel tightly as she sped down the dirt road leading home. Her mind raced, replaying every word those men had said. They knew her name. They knew her father. They had been watching. The thought made her stomach twist. By the time she reached the long driveway to their ranch, she had already made up her mind. Her father needed to know immediately. Ethan Hayes was in the training yard when she arrived, working with Atlas, his lead Belgian Malinois. The massive dog moved with precise discipline, responding to every silent hand signal Ethan gave. The other dogs, Havoc, Riot, and Shadow, watched from the sidelines, their eyes locked on their handler. Even in retirement, Ethan trained them as if preparing for deployment. Emily slammed the car door and strode toward her father. "Dad, we need to talk." Ethan turned, instantly reading the tension in her face. "What happened?" She recounted the encounter in the parking lot, repeating every detail. As she spoke, Ethan's expression darkened. He had known trouble was coming. He had been tracking cartel movements for months, but he hadn't expected them to target Emily so soon. His fists clenched as he listened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "They wanted to scare you," he said when she finished. "But they made a mistake." He walked past her toward the house, grabbing his secure satellite phone on the way. Emily followed, her heartbeat still erratic. "What are you going to do?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He scrolled through encrypted messages on his phone, checking recent cartel movements. Then, he hit a speed dial number. "They approached Emily," he said the moment the line connected. A pause. Then a voice on the other end responded. Ethan's jaw tightened. "They're escalating faster than we thought." Another pause. Then, "Understood. I'll handle it." He ended the call and turned to his daughter. "From now on, you don't go anywhere alone. You stay in public places and you follow every protocol I taught you. No exceptions." Emily crossed her arms. "Dad, I don't want to live in fear." Ethan's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "This isn't about fear, Em. It's about survival. They came to your school today. Next time, they might not just talk." She swallowed hard. She hated that he was right. Outside, Atlas let out a low growl, ears pricking toward the fence line. Ethan's eyes snapped to the movement in the distance, a black SUV creeping along the road, just slow enough to be noticed. His muscles tensed, instincts kicking in. "They're watching," he murmured. Then, with a deadly calm, "Let them." Ethan watched the SUV crawl along the perimeter of his property, his mind already calculating possibilities. He knew cartel tactics. First, they observed, tested reactions, then escalated. He refused to let them dictate the pace. He turned to Emily. "Go inside. Now." She hesitated for half a second before obeying, disappearing into the house. Ethan whistled low, a signal known only to his dogs. Instantly, Atlas and Shadow flanked him, eyes locked on the vehicle, muscles coiled like springs. He didn't need weapons, not yet. These animals were weapons. The SUV paused just outside the gate. Tinted windows concealed the occupants, but Ethan could feel their eyes on him. He stood tall, arms relaxed at his sides, exuding the kind of stillness that only came from years of combat experience. They were waiting for a reaction. He gave them nothing. After a long moment, the SUV rolled forward and disappeared down the road, dust trailing behind it. Ethan exhaled slowly, then turned to Atlas. "We need to make a call." Inside, Emily paced the living room, her phone gripped in her hands. She had already texted Logan Carter, her father's old friend and the maintenance head at her school. "Strange men at school today. They knew my name. Following Dad's protocols, but thought you should know." Logan's reply was immediate. "Understood. We'll keep eyes open. Stay sharp, kid." It should have reassured her, but her stomach remained tight. This was real. Too real. Ethan entered, dialing another secure number. The call connected. "Daniel, we have a problem." Agent Daniel Reyes, an undercover federal officer embedded in local law enforcement, answered with a quiet curse. "They made contact?" Ethan nodded, even though Reyes couldn't see him. "At the school. And now they're running surveillance on my property." A pause. Then Reyes' voice, edged with urgency. "That's fast. They're getting bolder." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They think I'm just a rancher with a few good dogs. They have no idea what they've walked into." Reyes exhaled sharply. "I'll push what I can from my end, but be careful. They won't stop at intimidation." Ethan glanced at Emily, who was pretending not to listen from the kitchen. "I know." As he ended the call, his mind was already shifting into a tactical mindset. The cartel had crossed a line by approaching Emily. Now they had his full attention. He stepped onto the porch, scanning the horizon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. He didn't see them, but he knew they were out there. Watching. Waiting. Ethan allowed himself a small, grim smile. Ethan drove in silence, his mind already running through contingencies. He had been gathering intel on Marino's operation for months, but tonight would be different. This wasn't recon anymore, this was action. The Desert Palm Warehouse was a known cartel stronghold, an unassuming structure on the outskirts of town used for legitimate business on paper. In reality, it was a hub for smuggling operations, with enough muscle inside to make sure no one asked questions. Ethan wasn't planning on a direct assault. He didn't need to be seen, he just needed proof. He pulled off the main road, killing his headlights as he guided his truck into a concealed position behind a ridge. The warehouse was visible from here, bathed in yellow floodlights, with two armed men standing at the entrance. A convoy of blacked-out SUVs and trucks were parked in a loose formation, and from the way the men moved, the shipment hadn't arrived yet. That meant he had time. He reached into the back seat, grabbing his tactical gear. Lightweight body armor, a suppressed rifle, and a small drone equipped with night vision. Atlas sat alert in the passenger seat, ears perked forward. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's head. "Stay." Atlas let out a quiet huff, not pleased with being left behind, but obedient. Ethan moved with the kind of practiced silence that only years of experience could teach. He slipped through the shadows, keeping to the blind spots of the warehouse's perimeter cameras. His instincts told him the security was tight but complacent. These men were used to threats coming from rival gangs, not from someone like him. Finding a vantage point, he deployed the drone, watching through his feed as it hovered over the compound. Inside the warehouse, stacks of crates lined the walls, marked with symbols he recognized cartel insignias, foreign weapons manufacturers. But it was the group of men gathered near the back that caught his attention. Moreno wasn't there, but his lieutenant was a man named Javier Diaz, known for handling logistics and cleaning up problems. Ethan zoomed in, his jaw tightening. A new face stood among them, dressed differently, carrying himself with military precision. Not a cartel thug. A contractor. That changed things. Ethan had suspected Moreno was upgrading his operation, but hiring ex-military professionals meant they were moving beyond drug running. It meant something bigger was coming. His radio crackled softly. Logan's voice. "Got eyes on the SUV near the school. They're not moving, but they're watching." Ethan exhaled. "They're waiting for my move." And they were about to get it. Ethan watched the scene unfold through his drone feed, memorizing the layout, the security rotations, the way the men carried themselves. The contractor, whoever he was, moved with authority. Not just another hired gun. This was someone with experience, someone used to command. That meant Moreno wasn't just expanding, he was restructuring, bringing in professionals to turn his cartel into something more dangerous. Ethan's window of opportunity was closing fast. His earpiece crackled. "Logan again. We've got a problem." Ethan's gut tightened. "Talk to me." The SUV near the school isn't alone anymore. A second vehicle just pulled up. Heavily tinted, different plate. They're not just watching now. They're coordinating. That was it. They weren't waiting for Ethan's move. They were making their own. Ethan pulled the drone back, packing up with swift precision. He had enough intel for now, but the priority had shifted. If they were escalating toward Emily, there was no more time for subtlety. He moved quickly back to his truck, Atlas already alert. The dog whined softly, sensing his urgency. "We're going," Ethan murmured, throwing the truck into gear. The drive back to town was a blur, every second stretching too long. His mind ran through worst-case scenarios, but he forced himself to focus. Emily was smart. She knew the protocols. But she was still a teenager facing a level of danger she wasn't prepared for. He cut off the main road and took a side route toward the school. As he approached, he spotted them immediately, two SUVs idling outside the gym parking lot, their engines running. Logan's truck was parked strategically nearby, but the presence of a second vehicle changed things. This wasn't just intimidation. This was a setup. Ethan killed his lights and pulled in behind a maintenance shed, out of sight. He reached for his rifle, then turned to Atlas. "Stay ready." His earpiece came to life again. Logan's voice tense. "They're getting out." Ethan moved fast. Two men had exited the first SUV, approaching the school entrance. The second vehicle's doors remained closed back up, waiting for a signal. Ethan had seen this exact formation before, overseas, when high-value targets were extracted. They were here for Emily. His vision sharpened, instincts kicking in. No one was taking his daughter. Ethan moved like a shadow, keeping to the edges of the parking lot as the two cartel operatives neared the school entrance. Logan had already stepped out of his truck, his stance casual but his hand resting near his concealed weapon. The men didn't acknowledge him, he wasn't their focus. Emily was. Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle. He needed to let this play out just long enough to confirm their intent. If they were here to scare her, he could use that. If they were here to take her, they wouldn't leave this parking lot standing. The school doors opened, and Emily stepped out with two friends. They were laughing, unaware of the danger. Ethan's heartbeat slowed, his breathing steady. The two men split, moving in a practiced formation. One positioned himself near the SUV, ready to cut off an escape route. The other adjusted his jacket, concealing a weapon. Ethan had seen enough. With a swift motion, he pressed his earpiece. "Logan, block the lot. Now." Logan moved instantly, stepping directly into the path of the man closest to Emily. "Hey fellas," he said, his voice friendly but firm. "You lost?" The operative hesitated. Logan was an obstacle, but not an obvious threat. "Move," the man said. "This isn't your business." Ethan was already behind them. His rifle was slung, but his knife was in hand, silent, efficient. He pressed it against the second man's ribs before he could react. "That's close enough," Ethan murmured. The man froze. He hadn't even heard Ethan approach. Emily saw him now, her eyes widening. She knew better than to react. Instead, she nodded slightly and whispered something to her friends, who quickly retreated toward the gym. The first man tried to push past Logan. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." Logan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, I don't think you understand." The second operative shifted, testing his options. Ethan pressed the knife a fraction deeper. "If you're thinking about reaching for that gun," he said softly, "don't." The man exhaled sharply, knowing he was beaten. Ethan could feel the tension in his body, the calculation. These weren't amateurs, but they also weren't prepared for someone like him. Then, the SUV's engine revved. The backup team was about to get involved. Ethan acted first. With one swift motion, he drove his elbow into the man's head, knocking him unconscious before he hit the ground. At the same time, Logan shoved the first man backward, sending him sprawling. Ethan drew his pistol and leveled it at the SUV. The vehicle hesitated, then peeled out of the lot, tires screeching. Ethan didn't lower his weapon until the taillights disappeared into the night. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The unconscious man lay sprawled on the pavement, his partner groaning as he tried to push himself upright. Ethan stepped forward, his boot pressing down on the man's wrist before he could reach for his weapon. "Stay down," he ordered, voice low and calm. The man froze, recognizing the authority in Ethan's tone. Logan kept watch, eyes scanning the parking lot. "We don't have long before someone calls this in." Ethan knew he was right. He crouched beside the conscious man, gripping the collar of his jacket and pulling him up just enough to look him in the eyes. "Who sent you?" The man's jaw tightened. "You know who." Ethan's fingers dug in, just enough pressure to remind him who was in control. "You came after my daughter." "That was a mistake." The man sneered. "You think this is over? You think Marino's just gonna walk away?" He let out a dry laugh. "You don't get it, do you? You're already dead." Ethan didn't flinch. He had heard those words before, in a dozen different languages, from men who thought power made them untouchable. They had all been wrong. He leaned in closer. "Then tell him to send more men. And this time, tell them to bring their own body bags." The man's smirk faltered. Logan exhaled. "We need to move." Ethan didn't bother with a response. He yanked the man forward and slammed his head into the pavement, hard enough to knock him out, not kill him. He stood, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off an old habit. Emily had been watching from a distance, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She met Ethan's gaze. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Ethan shook his head. "No." She exhaled, nodding slowly. "Then what's next?" He turned toward Logan. "Get Emily home. Lock everything down." Then, to his daughter, his voice softer but firm, "Stay inside. No exceptions." Emily opened her mouth to argue but stopped when she saw the look in his eyes. She had seen her father as a protector, a teacher, even a soldier. But now, for the first time, she was seeing something else. A hunter. Ethan turned away, heading for his truck. The cartel had made their move. Now it was his turn. Ethan drove with precision, weaving through back roads, avoiding main streets. His mind was clear, his focus razor sharp. Marino had crossed the line. This wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was an attempt to take his daughter. That meant one thing: no more waiting, no more playing defense. Tonight, he was going to dismantle whatever operation Marino was running, piece by piece. His first stop wasn't the cartel's warehouse. That would come later. He had a different target in mind. 15 minutes later, he pulled up outside a veterinary clinic, the one place in town still open this late. Olivia Chang was waiting inside, already aware something was wrong. She locked the door behind him as he entered. "I saw the news. 2 men unconscious outside the school, no suspects." "That was you, wasn't it?" Ethan didn't bother answering. "I need details on Marino's latest hires." Olivia sighed, moving to a cabinet. "I've been hearing chatter. Marino's been expanding, but he's not just bringing in muscle anymore. He's hiring people with military backgrounds, real training, not just street thugs." She pulled out a file. "I got this from one of my contacts. Name's Marcus Varela. Ex-private contractor. Former U.S. Army, worked overseas. Disappeared after a dishonorable discharge. Word is he's been running Marino's security upgrades." Ethan scanned the file. The man's face was cold, detached. He recognized the type: efficient, dangerous, and completely loyal to the highest bidder. He looked back at Olivia. "Where's he operating from?" She hesitated. "He's been seen at the Desert Palm Hotel. Marino's been running meetings out of there, bringing in new people." Ethan nodded. "Then that's where I'm going." Olivia grabbed his arm before he could turn. "Ethan, think about this. Marino isn't like the others you've dealt with. He's careful. If you make a move on him now, he'll come at you with everything." Ethan's voice was calm, but there was steel behind it. "He already has." He pulled away and headed for the door. Outside, Atlas was waiting by the truck, ears perked, ready for whatever came next. Ethan ran a hand over the dog's head. "We're finishing this." He climbed into the truck, his next destination locked in. The Desert Palm Hotel, where the real war was about to begin. Ethan parked half a block away from the Desert Palm Hotel, killing the engine and letting the night settle around him. The hotel was a high-end front for low-end business, a favorite spot for criminals who wanted to appear legitimate. Tonight, it was a hornet's nest filled with cartel members, bodyguards, and ex-military contractors. Exactly the kind of place Marino would operate from. Through his binoculars, he spotted movement. 2 guards at the entrance, earpieces in, scanning the street. More were posted near the side alley, standing in the shadows but alert. The lobby had at least 4 more, dressed like regular guests, but carrying themselves like men who expected a fight. The security wasn't just for show. They were ready for something. Ethan reached into the back seat, grabbing his suppressed rifle and securing it over his shoulder. He turned to Atlas, who was already alert, muscles tense with anticipation. "Stay close," he murmured. The dog didn't need further instruction. Moving through the alley, Ethan kept to the dark, approaching the hotel from an angle the guards weren't watching. The rooftop cameras were cheap, easily avoided if you knew what you were doing. Within minutes, he had reached a side access door, one that only staff used. He tested the handle. Locked. No problem. He pulled out a small tool set, picking the lock in under 15 seconds. Inside, the hallway was dim, the scent of bleach and cheap air freshener clinging to the walls. Footsteps echoed ahead. Hotel staff, unaware of what was happening upstairs. Ethan moved quickly, avoiding detection, making his way toward the service stairwell. His earpiece crackled. Logan's voice. 2 SUVs just pulled up out front. More muscle. "You might want to speed this up." Ethan exhaled. "Copy that." He reached the second floor, pressing against the wall as voices drifted from an open door ahead. 2 men stood inside, discussing something in Spanish. Ethan didn't need to understand every word to recognize the tone. Security check-in. They were reporting movements, confirming numbers. A third voice joined them. More controlled. More authoritative. Marcus Varela. Ethan recognized the name from Olivia's intel. Ex-military. Efficient. Deadly. And completely in the way. Ethan reached for his sidearm, exhaling slowly. He had spent weeks tracking these people, dismantling their network piece by piece. Now he was in their stronghold, one move away from tearing it apart from the inside. It was time to finish this. Ethan moved before they had a chance to react. His suppressed pistol came up, 2 precise shots dropping the first guards before they could reach for their weapons. The third man, Marcus Varela, was faster, diving behind a desk, drawing his own gun. Ethan shifted, firing twice, forcing him to stay down. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. Reinforcements. He had seconds before the entire floor was locked down. Ethan sprinted across the room, vaulting over the desk just as Varela came up with his weapon. He caught the man's wrist, twisting it hard, forcing the gun free. Varela retaliated, slamming an elbow into Ethan's ribs, but Ethan absorbed the hit, using the momentum to drive Varela into the wall. The man grunted, tried to push back, but Ethan was stronger. He twisted, bringing Varela down hard, locking his arm in place. "Where's Marino?" Ethan growled. Varela smirked through gritted teeth. "You're too late." Ethan drove his knee into the man's ribs. Wrong answer. The hallway door burst open. 2 more guards rushed in, rifles raised. Ethan rolled, pulling Varela into the line of fire. The first guard hesitated, just long enough. Ethan fired from behind Varela, hitting one in the chest. Atlas lunged from the shadows, teeth sinking into the second man's leg, dragging him down before he could fire. Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed Varela's head, slamming it against the floor, knocking him unconscious. More footsteps. More shouts. The entire hotel was waking up. He grabbed his earpiece. "Logan, I need an exit." Logan's voice came through instantly. "Loading dock, west side." 5 minutes. Ethan exhaled, grabbed a flash drive from Varela's desk, and sprinted for the stairwell. Atlas followed without hesitation. He had come for information. Now he had everything he needed. Ethan pushed through the stairwell door, heart pounding but movements precise. He took the steps 2 at a time, keeping his body low. Above him, voices shouted, orders being given. They were closing in fast. Atlas stayed close, ears flicking toward every sound. The dog's muscles were coiled, ready to strike at a moment's notice. They reached the ground floor. Ethan eased the door open, scanning the loading dock. Clear at least for now. His earpiece crackled. 3 incoming from the alley, Logan warned. Ethan moved fast, sticking to the shadows, his suppressed pistol raised. The first man stepped through, scanning the area. Ethan fired a single shot to the head. The second man reacted, bringing up his rifle, but Atlas was already on him. A snarl, a blur of movement, and the man went down, screaming as the dog crushed his arm. The third man hesitated. Ethan didn't. He put a bullet in his leg, then another in his chest before he could hit the ground. "Truck's coming in hot," Logan's voice cut in. Ethan turned, spotting headlights flashing once in the distance. Logan's signal. He sprinted forward, Atlas at his side, but then a new sound. Tires screeching. Another vehicle. A black SUV came around the corner, cutting off their exit. The doors flew open. Marino's men. Ethan dove for cover behind a metal crate as gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into the walls, ricocheting off the pavement. Logan's truck skidded into view, engine roaring. "Move, move, move!" Ethan didn't hesitate. He pivoted, firing 3 rapid shots as he ran, keeping the shooters pinned down just long enough. He reached the truck, yanked the door open, and shoved Atlas inside before jumping in himself. Logan floored the gas. The truck lurched forward, smashing into the SUV's front end, sending one of the gunmen sprawling. Ethan turned, aimed through the open window, and fired the final shot. The last man dropped. The truck roared down the street, disappearing into the night. The fight wasn't over. But tonight, they had won. Ethan Hayes hadn't always been a rancher. Years ago, he had lived in a world where survival depended on instincts sharper than a knife's edge. As a commander in an elite K-9 Special Operations unit, he had seen combat in places the government never acknowledged. His dogs weren't just animals. They were soldiers, trained to detect explosives, track enemies, and take down threats before they could pull a trigger. Together, they had hunted terrorists, disrupted trafficking networks, and neutralized high-value targets in the most hostile environments on the planet. But war had a way of taking everything. The missions, the adrenaline, the precision, it had all been manageable. What broke him wasn't the battlefield. It was what happened after. Maria, the woman who had been his anchor through deployments, who had waited for him through every classified mission, was gone. Cancer had stolen her before the doctors even had a chance to fight back. He had been overseas when the diagnosis came. By the time he made it back, she was already fading. The guilt of not being there haunted him more than any enemy he had ever faced. He had left the military after that. Not because he wanted to, but because Emily needed him. At 14, she had lost her mother. Ethan refused to let her lose her father too. So he walked away from a life of classified operations and built a new one in Verde Valley, a quiet ranch with enough land to breathe, to forget. At least that was the plan. But a man like Ethan never really disappeared. For the past year, he had been tracking movements across the Arizona-Mexico border. Drugs weren't the only things being trafficked. Cartels had expanded, smuggling weapons, humans, even military-grade tech. The town's law enforcement was either too overwhelmed or too compromised to fight back. So Ethan had done what he did best. He watched, he listened, and he gathered intel. Carlos Marino's name had surfaced too many times. He wasn't just another cartel boss. He was smart, patient, and dangerously well-connected. Marino was expanding operations into the U.S., and Verde Valley was a perfect entry point. Ethan had been a ghost in his world, staying just out of sight while feeding Reyes enough information to disrupt smaller operations. But now, Marino had turned his attention to the ranch. To Emily. That changed everything. Ethan stood in his command room, scanning the satellite images and drone footage from his private surveillance system. Marino's men had been probing the area for weeks, but today's approach at the school was a direct message. A challenge. Ethan had spent years hunting men like Marino. Now Marino had unknowingly stepped onto his battlefield. Ethan flexed his fingers, feeling the old instincts awaken. He had wanted peace, but if they wanted war, they would get one. Ethan leaned over his workstation, reviewing heat signatures captured from his hidden perimeter cameras. 3 vehicles had driven past the ranch in the last 2 hours, slowing just enough to be noticed. It wasn't random traffic. It was surveillance. They were studying him, probing for weaknesses. He could almost hear their conversations. Who's this man? Why is he a problem? How far will he go to protect what's his? They had no idea what kind of man they were dealing with. Carlos Marino wasn't reckless. He operated with a strategist's patience, expanding his network with precision. He didn't send threats without a plan, which meant today's encounter with Emily was only the beginning. Ethan had spent months disrupting his supply routes, feeding intel to Reyes and his team to intercept shipments, expose corrupt officials, and block cartel influence from seeping into Verde Valley. He had done it from the shadows, using surveillance, old contacts, and tactical precision. But Marino had figured it out. Ethan wasn't just some retired veteran with a few well-trained dogs. He was a problem that needed to be removed. He exhaled slowly, muscles coiling with the same tension he used to feel before deployment. His instincts told him Marino's next move wouldn't be another warning. It would be a test, a direct show of force to see how Ethan responded. Maybe a break-in, a fire, or an accident meant to shake him. Standard intimidation tactics. But Ethan didn't rattle easily. He pulled up a separate feed live surveillance from Emily's school parking lot. Even now, a black SUV sat idle 2 blocks away. Not close enough to be obvious, but unmistakable to someone who knew how to spot surveillance. Logan Carter had parked his truck strategically nearby, watching. Another former soldier who had learned to recognize predators. Ethan trusted him to keep Emily safe, but trust didn't mean he would wait for something to happen. He closed the laptop and stood, rolling his shoulders. Shadow and Havoc lifted their heads, sensing the shift in his energy. Years of training had made them more than just animals. They were extensions of his instincts. He gave a sharp hand signal, and both dogs rose, alert. Time to send a message of his own. Ethan stepped outside, locking eyes with Atlas, his most experienced companion. "We need to remind them," he murmured, rubbing the massive dog's head. "They think they're hunting us. Let's show them who's really the predator." Atlas didn't need further instruction. His ears perked, muscles tensed, eyes locked on the road. Ethan knew what was coming. The cartel had picked their fight. Now he was going to end it. The desert night was silent, but Ethan's mind was anything but. He sat on his porch, eyes locked on the distant road where the cartel's SUV had last been seen. His coffee had gone cold in his hands, but he barely noticed. Every instinct told him that tonight wasn't just another night. It was the beginning of something bigger. Emily had gone to bed hours ago, but he knew sleep wouldn't come easily for her. No matter how much he tried to shield her from this past, it had found its way to their doorstep. He had left the battlefield, but the battlefield hadn't left him. His radio crackled to life. "You awake?" Logan Carter's voice came through, low and cautious. Ethan smirked. "What do you think?" Logan let out a short chuckle. "Figured. That SUV from earlier? It looped around again about 10 minutes ago. They're not even trying to be subtle." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They're testing reactions." "Yeah," Logan agreed. "And they're about to get one." Ethan set his mug down and stood. Atlas, who had been lying by his feet, lifted his head, eyes glowing in the moonlight. The other dogs stirred, sensing their handler's shift in energy. Ethan didn't need to tell them what was happening. They already knew. "You feel like stretching your legs?" Ethan murmured to Atlas, slipping his rifle strap over his shoulder. The dog let out a soft huff of anticipation. Ethan moved like a ghost through the shadows, his steps silent as he approached the edge of the property. He had spent months reinforcing his land with hidden sensors, cameras, and defensive positions that no outsider would ever notice. Tonight he was done waiting. The soft crunch of tires on gravel reached his ears before he saw the vehicle. The same black SUV from earlier, creeping along the road. Ethan crouched low behind a ridge, raising his binoculars. Two men in the front. One in the back, talking on a phone. Armed. He pressed his radio. "Logan, you in position?" "Already ahead of you," came the response. "Let's give them something to report back." Ethan allowed himself a cold smile. They had spent weeks tracking him, trying to intimidate him. Now, it was his turn. Tonight, the hunt began. The following morning, Ethan sat at his dining table, sipping his coffee while reviewing surveillance footage from the night before. The SUV had lingered near his property for nearly an hour before finally retreating. That wasn't a scouting run anymore, it was confirmation. The cartel wasn't just watching him. They were preparing for something bigger. Emily entered the kitchen, her expression tight. "They were at school again," she said, dropping her bag onto a chair. Ethan immediately set his coffee down. "How close?" Emily crossed her arms. "Same SUV. Parked across the street. Same two guys as before. They didn't approach me, but I could feel them watching." She hesitated before adding, "Logan was there." He made sure they knew they weren't the only ones paying attention. Ethan's fingers curled into a fist against the table. He had expected intimidation tactics, but going after Emily in broad daylight was bolder than he anticipated. Carlos Moreno wasn't wasting time. His phone buzzed. An encrypted message. He read it quickly. "Shipment moving tonight. Location: Desert Palm Warehouse. Heavy security." Ethan exhaled slowly. This was the opening he needed. Moreno's operations had always been layered, protected by a mix of local corruption and brute force. But a shipment meant movement, meant exposure. If Ethan could intercept it, he'd have leverage. Emily watched him carefully. "You're going after them, aren't you?" Ethan looked at her. She was sharp, just like her mother had been, but she was still a teenager. He couldn't drag her into this. "I'm going to make sure they understand the message. They don't get to threaten you." Emily clenched her jaw. "They're not going to stop, Dad. You know that." He did. That's why he wasn't planning on simply sending a message. He was going to cut them off before they could escalate further. Ethan grabbed his keys and rifle, nodding toward Atlas and Shadow. "I'll be back before midnight. Lock up the house, follow protocol. No exceptions." Emily didn't argue. She just watched as her father stepped outside, his silhouette framed against the rising sun. She had seen this version of him before, the soldier, the hunter. And she knew that once he went after them, there was no turning back.